Certainly, when we go through books like Jeremiah or Isaiah that lifts up the holiness of God, holy, of course, is a pretty churchy word. What does it mean? Fundamentally, it means separate or set apart. Someone or something that is wholly unlike everything else. That's God. In the beginning, before we were made, before everything we can conceive of was created, God was there. And so while this is his story, we cannot on our own conceive of the story. We cannot conceive of God. We who are created cannot begin to wrap our head around the one who has always been. You've thought about that, right? You've asked, why did God, we can't do it. The best we can do, thanks be to God, is to receive his word. Because the one who has always been understood that we who have been created, if we are to know his story, would simply need to be told. That he would need to be revealed, and so he gave us the revelation. So, for example, later on in this Bible reading schedule, we'll focus on the Gospel of John. Here's how the Gospel of John begins. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. We're here because we want this life that God has created us to live, but we cannot have it without God revealing himself in ways that we would not otherwise know. And so John begins to unfold the story of the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. But extending from there, the Word given to us in God's revelation, that we might know him. And so that's why we're spending 9 months through the Word, so we might know God. Last one, like I said, first 5 words. In the beginning, God created. Explicit truth, God made it all, right? Nothing happened by accident. It's not like any of this was an oops. God created. There's thought and design and intention behind it all. And though we are talking about the importance of knowing the Word so that we can see that, we don't even need the Scripture for that one. For even the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 1, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Point being, how can anyone walk through this created world and think, oh, this just happened by chance? Oh, that was an accident. We all know that many believe that. I just don't get it. I don't. This past year, I was introduced to a person I should have known about, but I didn't. His name was Francis Collins. Anybody know who Francis Collins is? Dr. Strunk knows Francis Collins. Francis Collins, you should know him as well. He read his textbook. Francis Collins is the head of the National Institutes for Health. And so while Dr. Fauci's the guy on the television screen, Francis Collins is responsible for much of our nation's response to this pandemic and all of that. Francis Collins was a devout atheist earlier on in his life. I just got done talking to Dr. Strunk, and he was saying, yeah, I read his textbooks when he was in medical school. And he was not just an atheist, he was fairly aggressive against thoughts about faith. And yet, Francis Collins, when challenged by one of his patients about what he believes and why he believes it. Took his medical knowledge and applied science and began to study the world and faith. And wouldn't you believe, much as we've heard from other people, that Francis Collins is now a devoted follower of Jesus Christ. And he's leading our national response to this pandemic. He started a ministry called BioLogos, Word and Life, right? And the goal of the ministry is to help us see that science and faith are not competitors, but instead can complement one another to help us recognize God. This is the one I mentioned. So if you join the Love First in the Word group on Facebook, I'll put a link here and you'll be able to explore articles and videos. And it's a phenomenal resource I just discovered over the past year. And a story about a man who recognized, oh, this isn't by accident after all. In the beginning, God created. Explicit truth, God made it all. Implicit truth, or question. Well, then God must have had a reason, right? Isn't that fair? If God created all that is, then God must have had a reason for creating. For I don't know of anybody who has created anything without a reason for doing so. Whether it's a scientist or an artist or a composer, even my child, when they did a little work and brought it home, had a reason for creating. God must have a reason. And so the logical question when we come to Genesis chapter 1 is not the question we often ask. What's the question we often ask when we come to Genesis chapter 1? How did God create all that is? That's not the question to ask. The logical question to ask when we understand Genesis 1 from those first 5 words is, why did God create all that he created? Right? Genesis chapter 1 is meant to elicit from us a response of awe. Oh my goodness. You know, much because Crawford is designed in a scientific manner, you saw him begin to almost tear up when he reads creation. That's exactly the response that God wanted. And then the next question, why? Why did God want to do this? It is not how. You're aware that many of us, I'll include myself in that camp, have come to Genesis 1 and said, all right, so let me follow the formula here, day 1, day 2. Let me understand how God went about creating. That's not the purpose. It is not a recipe. It is not a formula. It is not history, such as we understand it. Genesis 1 is more like poetry. Not exactly, but more like poetry, a literary device meant to inspire awe and wonder. It's like the prologue of a book, right? If you don't believe me, let me show you really quick. I've shown you this before, and so I'm not going to belabor it, but I think it's important to see, right? And so, Stephen, if you'll put up the slide with all the days. And I know I'm going to treat you like a kindergartner here. I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you questions. I want verbal responses. I know the answers are right in front of you, but just so that we're all together, right? Let's together recognize, what did God make on day 1? Light and darkness, right. And what did God make on day 2? Sea and sky. He separated the waters, right? So the atmosphere and the ocean. There's this vault in between, it says. And what did God make on day 3? Yeah, he separates the water below, right? And dry ground appears, and here it is. What happened on day 4? Sun.